There has been so much craziness in this Moscow, Idaho case. I think that people are kind of going off the deep end with trying to figure out who killed these 4 University of Idaho students. I will not play this video, but it's from Newsmax. This is former FBI agent Jonathan Gilliam, and it says he's giving his chilling insight into the killings and explains what to expect next in the investigation. Well, if you go over there and watch it, this guy literally starts pointing the fingers at Steve Goncalves, I believe is how you pronounce the last name. So that's Kaylee's dad, and we know Kaylee's dad has been outspoken. He's been at the forefront criticizing police with how the investigation is going, lack of a direct suspect. But this former agent Gilliam is saying, well, Steve is kind of like his #1 suspect, so to speak. Jonathan is criticizing Steve for being out there. He said Steve gives an interview every 4 to 8 hours, and I don't blame Steve for doing that. But Jonathan here is saying that Steve contradicts himself. He's claiming there are worrisome statements being made, like, how would Steve know that the victims did not experience any pain and that they went quickly? I will admit that was an odd statement for Steve to make, but we still don't have the full quote with all of its context. You know, like some people were saying, Kaylee's dad here, Steve, may have just been saying, oh, I hope they went quickly and didn't feel any pain. And we don't know if the I hope part was edited out, or I'm praying they went quickly and didn't experience any pain. So it's hard with these news snippets to know what the heck is going on. But this guy takes it pretty far. I mean, I get it. He's using his former agent skills to say, look, I'm looking at everyone as a suspect until we know who for sure did this. But it is a little far. And I also get it. You know, the thought has crossed different minds when we see Steve come out and say, we need an alpha man to step up. We need an alpha personality, strong guy to step up and just, you know, tell the truth. Steve got so heated that his wife here, Christy, had to tell him to calm down. Most people feel empathy for Steve and his wife and all the victims' parents, because you don't know how you would act if you had to feel this type of grief. Thankfully, most people never will, thankfully, but yikes. This is the first guy to come out and kind of insinuate, Steve would be maybe #1 on my radar. Of course, I'm sure police are looking at every single person, but I'm sure Steve is just acting out of pain. He is frustrated with no arrests being made in this case. Thankfully, we've got Brian Enton on the case, and this is what people are talking about after I put up my most recent video on plunder last night. Then I see Brian Enton coming up with this.
3 weeks ago, the unthinkable happened in this house behind me. 4 university students brutally murdered here. Their killer not only is still on the run, but still all of this remains a mystery 3 weeks later. And we have breaking news tonight. New details that we have just confirmed. News Nation is learning that Kaylee Goncalves' injuries were significantly more brutal than her best friend Maddie's injuries, which may end up being a very, very important piece of evidence when it comes to determining who the target was in this attack.
So that was the first we heard of Kaylee's injuries being significantly more brutal than her best friend Maddie's injuries. We don't know what that means. And a lot of people are thinking that's probably something Steve told Brian Enton, perhaps, because Steve is probably tired of coming out and leaking stuff himself, and having to not hold back as much as law enforcement wants him to. You know, some people, I think a lot of people just agree with Steve. They have sympathy for him as a grieving father. People want this perpetrator found. Of course, cops do too. But there's another segment of folks who I know are saying, oh, Steve's going to ruin this case. He's blabbing too much. But I think for the most part, most people like me just have a sympathetic heart for him. We don't know how Brian Enton came across this info, but I'm glad it's being reported because cops are putting out updates and we'll take a look at them. But wow, this Newsmax video was yikes. this New York Post article was also giving us a bit more info too that we didn't know. So Steve is turning to a private investigator, and he fears that the cops in this case are too inexperienced. So he raised his fears Sunday in an exclusive interview with the New York Post. He was concerned, too, that the hoodie guy at the food truck was ruled out too quickly. And according to Steve, hoodie guy has not taken a DNA test. Now, I don't know if Steve knows that. Is that confirmed, or is he listening to internet rumors, or is he listening to true reports? People in the local area know what's going on mostly. So he lashed out at the lack of basically results. This New York Post article says that one of the murder squad officers is only 26 years of age. So he's complaining that kid was only 19, I'll say, when the sleepy city of Moscow had their last murder basically 7 years ago in 2015. Steve says to the Post, so they're just inexperienced, and I don't want anyone making mistakes in my child's case. So he blasted the officers as not exactly the most tech-savvy people either. So of course we shouldn't come against anyone because of their age, whether we feel they're too young or too old. That doesn't mean they can't still solve this case. But I hope they are tech-savvy, especially with the FBI involved. But Steve has started working with a private investigator.
Based on my own reporting, talking to the family, they're not at the point right now where they are going to actually hire a private investigator. It was more of sort of a discussion at this point because they are getting frustrated. But I think right now, in this moment, they're trying to maintain confidence in the police.
But Steve has started working with private investigators because there were enough insiders telling us we should be concerned, now that's a quote, about the lack of any clear leads. It's been more than 3 weeks since that happened. So Steve is saying, I talked to detectives, but Steve says he is making clear he's been keeping away from internet sleuths, whom he dismissed as Hollywood-ish. So that lets you know maybe Steve isn't just relying on internet gossip. Now, I know his daughter, Olivia, she is Kaylee's older sister. She is in the Facebook group, at least one of them I've seen. So I'm sure Olivia's probably relaying some information over to Steve. But Steve is relying on these PIs and their age and experience. One of the private detectives I talked to has 50 years in the game. So that's what Steve is hanging his hat on, apparently. These guys who had to break cases when there wasn't DNA. He is suggesting that the young cops rely on DNA too much. I mean, DNA is very, very helpful, obviously, but you do have to know how to do good old-fashioned detective work, rely on the DNA as well, genealogy, everything they've been talking about, all the tech. You know, so on the one hand, he's criticizing them for not being too tech savvy, and he's also criticizing law enforcement for apparently relying too much on DNA. But he does say we're trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. So Steve wants the cops to be heroes and hopefully prove him wrong. Steve says, I'll apologize. I'll come out and say these guys had amazing DNA or some evidence and good for them. I was giving them ish and I take it back. I'd love to be wrong and we can get this guy. So he's saying he's frustrated the cops have not put out an official profile of who it could be, just anything. But Steve said an official profile of the perpetrator would give all these other girls that are walking around that community somebody to look out for. Don't make more victims. This is when he started touching on the white hoodie guy or gray hoodie guy, whatever color that hoodie is, in the Grub Truckers food truck video. So this was the guy. I think the internet calls him Jack S. So many Jacks in this story. So he was hanging out, waiting for Maddie and Kaylee, and we know Maddie and Kaylee just kind of ditched him. Steve says about Hoodie Guy, some people came to us and said that he's out of the country. He didn't take a DNA test. Now I'm wondering, I don't think cops have passed on that info. We will look at the cops update in a second. But I wonder how Steve knows that Hoodie Guy didn't take a DNA test. You hear all these wild rumors about Hoodie Guy. You hear that he drove 5 hours that same night over to Boise. Now you hear Hoodie Guy is in South Africa or somewhere. Now we're hearing he didn't allegedly take a DNA test. People are wondering if he can ever be extradited back to the US. Steve said, so we would like police to tell us what his alibi was. That's one point Steve wants to know. Mainly, Steve is saying just share whatever alibis you have from people and he would feel a little bit more comforted. So if Hoodie Guy, if cops have already ruled him out like they say they say the male in the Grub Truckers video, they've written things a little bit strangely, but other times they've referenced more directly the Hoodie Guy. He's not a suspect. People don't like the word cleared, but police at this time aren't naming any suspects, and they specifically went through to, in essence, clear him at this time. But Steve wants to know the alibis. So I know some people might think, well, as the victim's dad, you're not necessarily owed everything the police know, and I understand that. But folks also understand why Steve is so just wanting answers. They all do. They all want answers, and especially if it really were Kaylee, their daughter, Steve and Christy's daughter, who experienced more brutality, at least more than Maddie in her death. I'm not sure how much brutality that was in relation to Zaina and Ethan, but maybe that's one reason Steve and Christy are also taking the forefront. If their daughter took the brunt of things, and we hear so many rumors, are these just all rumors? What is truth? What is fact? I'm sure Steve knows from the funeral director, or there's so many ways he probably knows more than he's sharing with the public. The vague, mixed messaging doesn't help. We don't know still if Kaylee really was the target, and police will kind of dig into her stalker incident too. But Steve said, I've heard people talk to reporters and say that they'd be way more scared if it wasn't targeted. And I totally understand that, because Steve is saying some people think that means they, the victims, were, gambling or doing drugs, or they were doing something that made them come after them. That is the first messaging I got too. Back when I first heard of this crime initially, the first things we heard were, oh, crime of passion. It was targeted. Of course, still horrible nonetheless, but cops made it sound like it was just, they ruled out a murder-suicide, but they still made it sound like it was something contained within the household. So they made it sound like they had it under control. They kind of know why this happened. They haven't arrested anyone yet, but in those first few days, they made it sound like, we got this. No need to worry. Nothing to see here. I mean, even the initial reports on the University of Idaho Twitter, it spoke of, cops are looking into a homicide. Well, they could have said quadruple homicide. I'm sure they knew by noon or whatever, 11:58, and by noon, I'm sure they were in that house finding victims. As soon as they found 4 victims, that should have went out far and wide to help people solve this case sooner. But it was kind of like police are investigating a homicide. That was the first tweet. So it does feel like from the beginning, I don't know who's responsible for it, but the crime has been downplayed. And so I kind of agree with Steve. Are they trying to bury this story because it looks so bad for the college town? Steve said, my message is, I think having a couple of beers with your girlfriend, going home, texting and crashing out in the bed together, I think a lot of girls did that. And a lot would be targeted if that's all they did. So yeah, he doesn't like that word targeted, and I don't blame him. There's a lot of missteps in the way this case was handled. Steve doesn't feel confident, as we talked about in my other video. The cops have looked him in his eyes. He feels like they're trying to do everything they can, but if the evidence isn't there, that's the part I'm concerned about. That's what he told Fox. Steve doesn't want to be this leader in the forefront, but I feel like he feels compelled to be. But we did get updates from Moscow, Idaho. So the latest update we got, and today is Monday, December 5th, we can tell cops are kind of clapping back directly at Steve and his interviews because he's been the main one out there. We know Kara, mom of Zaina Kernodle, has given a phone interview as well, and she kind of sides with him in terms of they've got to know something. But it says there have been statements and speculation about this case, victim injuries, cause of death, evidence collection and processing, and investigative techniques. With the active criminal investigation, law enforcement has not released additional facts to the family or the public. We recognize the frustration this causes and that speculation proliferates in the absence of facts. Yes, indeed. However, we firmly believe speculation and unvetted information is a disservice to the victims, their families, and our community. The Moscow Police Department is committed to providing information whenever possible, but not at the expense of compromising the investigation and prosecution. So, yeah, I get it. No one wants to mess up a case, but people in that town, I'm sure, are scared. I mean, they are grieving the loss of these 4 beautiful young students who should have just gone on, been able to just live their lives. But people are scared. They don't know whether to send their kids back to class or town or not. So it's not just like a bunch of nosy Nellies trying to figure out what's going on. It's people are trying to hold law enforcement's feet to the fire. Now, if they really know what they're doing, they're being methodical, they're being careful. I know a lot of stuff takes a lot of time. All that video evidence, all that digital evidence, everything they have to go through will take tons of time. I get that. But if they're kind of playing semantics, concerned more about the reputation of the University of Idaho, then I don't blame Steve for being mad. They should not have disallowed the grieving father and mother. They should not have disallowed them to put up a wanted poster. Put those 4 students' faces that'll forever be etched in our minds. Wanted, $50,000 reward for information leading to whoever harmed them. That kind of stuff helps. But cops told Steve not to do that? Why? What would that have hurt? If he would have really raised a reward and someone really might have come forward with info, money is a great motivator. Someone would have come forward with info that maybe helped lead to the arrest and prosecution of someone. Like Steve said, everyone has the same goal. I don't blame Steve for being angry because he's questioning the motivation, like what's really at stake here? What's really most important here? The update continued. Detectives continue investigating what occurred from approximately 9 p.m. on November 12th to 1:45 a.m. on November 13th, when Ethan Chapin and Zaina Kernodle were believed to be at the Sigma Chi house on the University of Idaho campus at 735 Nez Perce Drive. Any interactions, context, direction, and method of travel, or anything abnormal could add context to what occurred. There's still a big gap of missing info for Ethan and Zaina. And Zaina's mom was saying that her dad, Jeff, probably thought, oh, Zaina and Ethan probably went to a bar. She said that's what most college kids do on the weekends. So if they really did go to a bar, which one did they go to? And why aren't witnesses coming forward to corroborate? Or maybe, they did something more personal. Maybe they took a drive around Idaho. Maybe they had a secret spot somewhere they liked going. I don't know. Maybe that's why there's still so many questions about missing gaps in times and unknown activities for Zaina and Ethan. And was there really something that happened at the frat party? So detectives are working with nearly 3,000 email tips, phone tips, more than 1,000 digital media submissions. We believe someone has information that will add context to the picture investigators are creating of what occurred that evening. Our focus is the investigation, not the activities. Your information, whether you believe it is significant or not, might be one of the puzzle pieces that help solve these murders. This is where they touch on Kaylee's stalker. Using tips and leads, investigators have identified an incident involving Kaylee at a local business, which may have been the stalker reference she made to friends and family. In mid-October, 2 males were seen inside a local business. They parted ways, and one male appeared to follow Kaylee inside the business and as she exited to walk toward her car. So some guy was following her inside and as she exited to walk toward her car. I wonder what local business this is. The male turned away, and it did not appear he made any contact with her. Detectives contacted both males and learned the 2 were attempting to meet women at the business. This was corroborated through additional investigation. Based on available information, detectives believe this was an isolated incident and not an ongoing pattern of stalking. No evidence suggests the 2 males were involved in the murders. So, yeah, that could be a time when Kaylee might have mentioned if she noticed that guy, and it sounds like she was pretty astute according to her family, head on a swivel. She knew, gorgeous girl, so I'm sure guys were looking all the time, and they teach you situational awareness. Be aware of guys and be aware of people looking at you, following you. There's a great thread I saw on Reddit today about beautiful women and how some men really reacted to these beautiful women and just how angry they got, even when the woman just said, no thank you to a drink or a dance or what have you. So I'm not sure if that was that type of scene, though. Investigators continue looking into information about Kaylee having a stalker. Information about a potential stalker or unusual occurrences should go through the tip line. So that's cool that they are. See, detectives are hard at work. That may have taken days or hours or weeks to track down those 2 guys, pull maybe video footage, find out their names, get them in for an interview, and decide, oh, they were just guys hanging out hoping to meet girls, and maybe he didn't get up his nerve to talk to Kaylee. It didn't work out. So maybe Kaylee noticed, and maybe Kaylee told a friend or someone else, this guy was stalking me. This is where they talk about information about the dog Murphy, and this info conflicts. Now, while it's good that they give us a little bit more information about Murphy the dog during the murders, it also conflicts with what they told us before. So it starts out, there have been numerous requests about the dog found at the residence on the morning of November 13th, where in a previous article they claimed they found the dog at night. So I believe it was this December 1st one. People thought this was weird on December 1st when cops came out and said, on the night of the incident, officers located a dog at the residence. The dog was unharmed, turned over to animal services, and later released to a responsible party. So folks were like, wait a minute, because details matter. People may think it's really petty and we all make mistakes. People think it's nitpicking, but folks were like, wait a minute, the dog was found that night, that Sunday night. We know officers responded at 11:58 a.m. to the 1122 King Road home. So they were thinking, wow, it took them well into that night to find the dog. Where was Murphy? But it turns out they found the dog that morning, if this most recent update is correct. There have been numerous requests about the dog found at the residence on the morning of November 13th. So, indeed, if they really arrived at 11:58 a.m., if they made entrance into the home, they saw the crime scene, they found Murphy before noon, indeed, it was that morning, Sunday, they found the dog. And that makes more sense because people were wondering, that night, did it take them like 6 or 8 hours to find a dog running around a crime scene? Or where was he? Arriving officers entered the residence and found the deceased victims. During the search of the home, a dog was found in a room where the crimes had not been committed. So we don't know if he was locked away in a room where the crimes had not been committed. Which room? Officers did not find any evidence on the dog, and there was no indication the animal had entered the crime scene. The dog was taken to animal services and released to a responsible person. And so people were wondering if this is also a conflicting statement, but I don't think so. While the dog was in the house when officers arrived, it has not been determined where the dog was physically located when the murders took place. So, even though they found the dog Murphy in some room where the crimes had not been committed, they don't know if Murphy, I guess, was physically located in that room while the perpetrator was committing the murders. People think this points to the fact that the dog Murphy may have known the perpetrator. Maybe. We don't know if Murphy was there, but obviously I don't think Murphy was. Maybe he would have tracked, blood on his paws if he were in there when it was happening. Stranger things have happened. There have been plenty of cases. Go on Reddit, you'll see a lot, and Facebook, where some crazed person will kill a bunch of human beings, but they will literally, one guy left dog food for the dogs and water. One other killer stayed at some residence. He did away with a person or persons there and stayed in the residence and took care of the animals. So there are people who will treat animals a lot better than human beings. So it's not weird to see this. I get it, they just don't know. They found a dog in the room. I don't know if he was in the bathroom. I don't know if Murphy was locked away in a closet. So maybe that's why officers didn't find any evidence on the dog and no indication that the animal had entered the crime scene. That's good. I mean, not good in terms of evidence. People were talking about how, I believe it was the O.J. Simpson case where a dog was petted on the way out. It was one case where dogs can definitely contain DNA evidence. So it was not a bad question that Lawrence Jones, I believe it is, asked of Aaron Snell from Idaho State Police when he laughed at him. And Lawrence was saying, is the dog involved in the investigation? He meant, are you guys really, have you combed the dog for evidence? I knew what he meant, have you checked the dog for scarring? Because that type of thing could let you know, that could also lead you to the perpetrator. It could let you know if Murphy easily went with the perpetrator to another room, if he wasn't harmed. Maybe it's someone who knew him and loved dogs. If Murphy would have been harmed or, left out or uncared for or even harmed himself, done away with, then it could have been someone who hates dogs or, someone who knew the victims had been to that house and had been to that home and could have potentially have been to that home, had a run-in over the dog, hated dogs, or, maybe someone wouldn't give away the dog. And I think, not to say he's involved at all, but I think cops, of course, should look more into the text that Kaylee sent about her ex. Please come over. And we know her ex has been cleared. But at some point, Kaylee mentioned, we have a dog together. It's not clear if she texted that to her ex-boyfriend that same night when they were calling him. Was she texting her ex to say, we share a dog together, you need to come visit, or whatever the correct verbiage was. All of that would have to be looked into. So now we know a little bit more about Murphy, but all we have is, at this time, no suspect has been identified, and only vetted information that does not hinder the investigation will be released to the public. There is speculation without factual backing, stoking community fears, and spreading false information. We encourage referencing official releases for accurate information and updated progress. So yeah, we're doing both. We're looking at all these updates they send us, but we are also watching, News Nation, Brian Inton, I'm glad he's on the case out there, and all the people providing us updates, Ashley Banfield, and I'm grateful Steve is still talking. I'm glad Kaylee's dad is talking because he keeps the news cycle going. He keeps the pressure up. I mean, cops don't need bad pressure. I get it. Some people believe in relax let the cops do their job. They want to catch this person as much as the next guy. But also, I think sometimes a little good pressure like this does not hurt, especially in light of just what they've been through, and not letting them put reward posters up. I mean, that would be kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, where I see why Steve is saying, yeah, I'm giving them time. But I think the mishandling of the communication of this whole case from the beginning is what set it off to a bad start. But that doesn't mean they can't finish well and literally catch whoever did this. So let's close with John 10:7-9. So Jesus said again, I assure you, most solemnly say to you, I am the door for the sheep leading to life. All who came before me as false messiahs and self-appointed leaders are thieves and robbers, but the true sheep did not hear them. I am the door. Anyone who enters through me will be saved and will live forever and will go in and out freely and find pasture, spiritual security. Thanks so much for watching. Over here on Moon Emotion, I plan to be a little bit more casual, still cover some of the same cases I cover on Plunder, but it might be more, just quicker, casually, just talking back and forth and going over some of these theories, because new things are popping up every day. We want to separate the wheat from the chaff, as they say, and just figure out what is happening. So thanks for watching. Stay tuned. Check out the links below if you want to see my video from yesterday, and take care. We'll stay on it and praying in Jesus they catch this killer soon.